Hello and welcome to the 2022 OPAL Special Awards Program, a program where 3 prizes are awarded to firms or individuals who do outstanding and game-changing work within the 3 segments of sustainability, innovation and social impact. From a short list of outstanding candidates, our judges choose only one winner. In this short presentation, we announce the prize winner in social impact. OPAL seeks to celebrate design firms that positively change people's lives and improve communities through design and architecture. So, let's get on with it and reveal the prize winner. The 2022 OPAL Special Award for Social Impact goes to
the 2022 OPAL Special Award for Social Impact, FUTURECITY, Mark Davy.
So, Mark, congratulations. FUTURECITY has been awarded the Social Impact Award. And this award program already brings for over 35 years exposure and reward to the best property projects from around the world. So what does this mean for FUTURECITY to be recognized in this category?
Well, yeah, thank you so much. I mean, what a great honor. It's a lovely surprise, and in a way, I feel it reflects on the kind of work that we've been doing as a placemaking agency now for in fact, this is our 15th year, and over those years, I've had some amazing people work with me, and I think this really reflects on the individuals that I've managed to pull into FUTURECITY's work. It's just brilliant that they get the recognition and attention that I hope this brings to them. So the other thing, of course, is I hope it also promotes social impact within the built industry. I mean, it's obviously these are new areas, and we're kind of all exploring what that actually means. What does this social impact mean, and other ESGs? So yeah, it's a lovely recognition. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, well, and very well deserved, of course, because FUTURECITY is really one of its kind culture and placemaking consultancy firms, and well, we have experienced that as well, of course, in our collaboration on the South Bank development in Melbourne, for which you actually curated the partnership between Centre Pompidou and the South Bank developer Beulah. So yeah. Very successful, and also, well, I think you're great in convincing governments and developers of the economical impact and social impact of culture integration in our cities. So that's really great. So you strive for cultural excellence in our cities, and you do see a changing role and purpose of modern cities. Can you tell us a bit more about this changing purpose of our cities? Like which elements in cities do impact social health, for example?
Well, and it's really interesting. And again, it's timely that I'm in Bergen, because I've been here at a symposium where planners from all over Norway have come to share ideas about how they're beginning to use culture and arts in regeneration, and have arrived with artists and with their arts officers and so on. It's been an amazing experience. So it kind of reinforces, I guess, a lot of how cities have begun to change from, places of manufacture, particularly Western cities, places where we built things and lived elsewhere, to places now that I would say are cities of culture. They're places of ideas. They manufacture IP, they manufacture experiences. So the kind of need for a modern city, I think, is completely different. So I think what we've tried to do over the 15 years we've been going is just push that sort of cultural agenda so that it's at the top of the pyramid, if you like, rather than at the bottom. I mean, historically, the notion of arts and culture has been something you add on at the end of a process. And, certainly we've had a great experience with you in studio, where I think you've always got it. So I think that's been our strength. It's been pushing ourselves into places perhaps where other arts organisations haven't been able to go, and then proving that the effectiveness of arts and culture to create place, I think, and create a narrative.
Yeah, and what's the effect on the social health in cities then of culture? Like I mean, it's obviously related also very much to this focus on ESG in the developments of projects. Like what does culture in cities for social health?
Yeah, well, again, I think in changing times, we have to go with the changing world that we're in, and maybe there's an argument that the systems we use are not quite fit for purpose anymore. When we're becoming more and more interested in the software of a place rather than the hardware, it's requiring a very different sort of what's the word, a different way of communicating and putting ideas together. And at Future City, we talk about people, culture, place. And we see the three are sort of inseparable, really. The foundations for civic vibrancy, history, sense of community, sense of identity, and creativity. These are all really important elements. The big thing is, how do you turn those ideas, those abstract ideas, into tangibles? So I think social impact, social health has got to be about inclusivity and place and participation, which is sometimes at odds with the way we develop and build our urban centres.
And this, how does that social impact quantify? Do you dare to make an say something about that?
No, I do. I think we have to have a different way of measuring, and I think when a place perhaps feels personal, and someone can see that a space has genuine care has gone into the making of that space, it has ripple effects, and hopefully those people feel seen and heard and reflected, inspired, and it's part of an evolution. So I think the way we measure people's involvement in making places, their participation in that thing, that we're very interested at the moment in co-creation, where you begin to give communities control over building or design, or at least some sense that they're in it together, rather than just being detached, saying what they want and waiting for someone to deliver it. So the measure of social health, I think, is people feeling that the place they're in is something that they belong to, and to recognize that that place has been influenced perhaps by their individual ideas, their stories, their lives, the community identity. In fact, a few years ago, I think when I first started, I really don't think that was really high on the agenda at all. No. It's something that I really feel it's only become important. The idea that you're in a community and that community is strong is now seen as a positive asset. Yeah. Whereas before it was just something that was next to the site where the development was taking place. I'm talking very much in terms of new development and regeneration, of course.
Yeah. Do you have what do you consider over the time that Future City developed and built up a portfolio? What do you consider in the light of social impact, because that's where you received this award for? Yes. What was your most successful project?
I think perhaps we'll talk a little bit about Wembley Park a bit later, but because that's a much bigger, more complex thing. But in terms of a specific piece of work, I would say it's the Lab E20, which is a creative hub in East London. We got involved with Get Living's a build-to-rent scheme called East Village on the site of the old Athletes Village in Stratford. And Stratford's going through major change. They've got this new innovation district. There are all these there's the velodrome and the new stadium, the new parks. I mean, it's a place that's post-Olympics is changing out of all recognition. And what we wanted our client to do there was to understand how connected they were, or should be, to the new fashion district, to the new innovation district. So we kind of persuaded them to come up with this idea for experiential retail, cultural exhibition and creative space, and a particular focus on positive fashion and sustainable living. And we brought in an amazing designer, Christopher Rayburn, who's founder of Rayburn, to actually curate the space and bring in a whole series of amazing organisations, including Lonehood, Green Lab, London College of Fashion, and to start populating this kind of shell and core space. And it's been really successful, and it's now sort of gone on to it's kind of got a life of its own, and it's now the place you go to, particularly in the East End, but elsewhere, to launch fashion related projects. And that's also then connected into the residents in the development itself, are really using this space. It's getting visitors from outside, and it's got it's credible as a space. It doesn't feel like it's manufactured, or it's a sort of developer's kind of idea. It feels like it really does feel like it's something that's unique. And I was looking just earlier actually at the program for the next few months. And they've got community film clubs and knitting clubs, and there's a sustainable Christmas market headed up by Christopher Rayburn. There's a fashion metaverse launch, a Tracy's exhibition exploring migration and experience of communities, and even a gig school for free music making. So this place has become a really experimental, creative hub, and I'm very proud of it. I'm proud of the way that it came out of a major strategy for the whole development.
What was needed to get them there then? What triggered them to go there, or was there an economic model behind it to allow them to come?
Yeah, it's a good question. The interesting thing about build to rent in the UK, as we're moving from, if you like, from a build to sell to a build to rent market. Now, the difference there is that development works on the model of that there has to be, 98% of its space of a residential offer has to be full. And really, you want to keep the people there as long as you can. So the difference now for developers is they're there for the long term. So there is an incentive now to create places where things are happening and things that are not, that don't necessarily need massive control. So you really want the residents there to feel that the ground floor space, the units, the content is genuine. It's authentic, and that what's happening is really for them and reflects their identity. Very much going back to that social health question. So what happened here was that all of the ground floor spaces, the commercial space, the argument really was that they became much more about creative content than just about, if you like, conventional businesses filling a commercial space. And the importance of that resident experience is way more, I would say, more important than random commercial businesses going in on the ground floor. So it got the developer perhaps to be a bit more sort of experimental, a little bit more aware of bigger issues than just commercial day-to-day commercial issues with letting its commercial space. Does that make sense?
So you allowed, or there was a lower rent allowed for those groups moving in?
Yes, there was. So it was subsidized, and there was an investment by the developer in that space. So again, completely at odds, I guess, with an old-fashioned idea that all the ground floor units must go at full rental value. And we're seeing this across multiple projects now, where the ground floor, if you that conventional, I'm not so sure in the Netherlands whether it's the same, but certainly in the UK, there's this classic thing of the development is all above the ground floor is residential, and then the ground level is all commercial. But the problem with a lot of that, especially in our changing world of shopping and consumerism, is that you're seeing a lot of these empty units. So I think developers are beginning to sort of understand that actually maybe those spaces can have a more of a kind of urban theatre kind of role, and rather than having to put any business that will pay the rent into that space. And certainly certainly with build to sell, I guess they just want to sell it, move on and get out. But build to rent, that's not the case. They, as I said before, they have a long-term view. So it allows them, I think, to have a longer-term commercial idea of how to make that development successful.
I can imagine that because I assume you talk a lot to developers then, especially and trying to convince them of this kind of counterintuitive approach, because it's as you say, like it used to be like the old model is really like earning with programming the planes, and that's where the commercial program is. And so could you maybe explain a bit more about your typical approach to really integrate cultural districts in neighborhoods?
Yes, I think when I first started in this sector, and it was quite a shock, I think, to come into it from a sort of arts and an education background. I realized the scale of the teams, these huge teams that deliver these projects, and how rarely they meet. And it's very compartmentalized, it's very systems based. And so to put anything into those kind of projects of scale was very difficult. You become isolated. So we started talking about this idea of placemaking principles and creative districts. So it's almost like you're creating this huge club, And there's a set of rules in the club that everyone has to abide by. But the rules in this case, if you like, are a series of creative placemaking ideas that are exciting and big enough that most of those consultants can get involved and feel they can contribute to it, but not so prescriptive that it alienates the wider part of the team. Before all of that, we do a lot of research. So we do a sort of what we call cultural auditing and mapping. So we'll take a kind of series of lines out from the center of the development, and it could be everything from ecology, history, heritage, conurbations, a cluster of a particular trade, particularly around creative industries. It could be communities, it could be policies and strategies that are going on with local boroughs, and we'll effectively come back and spread that material out on the table. And then we'll do an internal audit, which is to kind of say, what are you going to spend your money on? What are your aims and objectives? You know, is it towers, housing, public realm, parks, and so on? And then I think what we'll try and do is put those two things together and start saying, look, if you work with this group, this will happen. If you connect this to something else, you have a much bigger opportunity. Be brave and bring artists and creatives in at an early stage, whereas we did with you on Beulah. You know, we worked right from the beginning. We always had this brilliant sort of collaborative, creative approach to that job, which has really paid off with, as you say, Centre Pompidou moving there. So we've managed to show developers that they can actually be highly creative. It doesn't affect their deadlines or even their bottom line. It just takes a little bit of bravery, I think. And I guess what Future City has always been able to do is to be that sort of organization that they could trust, that would deliver. And I don't think there was anyone in the industry before that could actually sit in the room alongside yourselves and engineers and highways engineers and so on.
Yeah.
But I absolutely believe now that this idea of these units of culture, so the city of culture or region, creative quarters, arts quarters, downtown, this idea of a sort of creative unit in which, you know, there's a kind of activity inside it can be influenced by that kind of club-like idea of a creative hub of some kind.
How would you, because I believe that, or that's something that we are now looking very much into, and I think architects are not the best examples of caring very much about post-occupancy, because it's really the nature of the industry is you deliver a project and you have to, well, continue to the next, especially with this kind of really curating, building it, but also making sure that it continues. How do you assure that, well, it's continuously be curated? Because placemaking is often, well, it's a very trendy term, like you do it and then you have a place and then you leave. Yes. How do you assure that it continues or even grows, develops in the right direction?
Well, it's a very good question, and I think it comes back to this idea of needing new approaches to property. You know, in the past, it's exactly as you say. You would have the master planner, the architect, the landscape architect, the engineers, and so on. Then there'll be agents that would let space. But I think that was in a time, you know, where there was a kind of certainty. And I think one thing we've all learned in the last few years, with the pandemic, with the war, with the changing nature of society's interest in, you know, consumerism, shopping, all those certainties have kind of fallen down. So the problem, if you like, in a world where you need certainty to build, to write the brief, it's been quite difficult, I think, for developers to sort of understand what they should do. On the other hand, the positives that come out of that are perhaps that, you know, new types of people are coming into the business, and challenging the way these developments work. And I was just thinking again of Wembley, you know, when we worked on Wembley Park, which was a huge piece of work for us, you know, we were able to convince Quintain to create a new post, and we appointed a cultural director for Wembley, whose job it was to effectively, you know, and also a guy called Josh McNaughton, actually, you know, got an amazing background at Rich Mix and elsewhere. And if you look at what's happening over there, you know, you cannot say that what's happening at Wembley is sort of like superficial developer art, kind of culture washing. You know, he's got major programming going on. He's got all artists, musicians, and all of that has then attracted the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra to move to this new location from central London to, you know, effectively to Brent, which is a suburban borough. You know, so I think if you get an organization like Quintain who've got funding, taking it that seriously, where all of their decisions are driven by a kind of cultural infrastructure.
Yeah.
You see that. What's the effect of that? Loads of people are going down there. They're getting huge amounts of attention. They're in against the odds. They're bringing in some really interesting businesses who want to relocate there. The residency occupation is really high. I think like 98%. So the cultural element of life, of place, of the kind of social impact it's really exciting, and I've all we've known each other a long time, Acto, so I've always been pushing for this, but sometimes you stand in a room, sometimes you think, seriously, can you not get it? It's so obvious that this is a way you should go. But I guess when an industry is so driven by systems, it's very hard for those people in the room to sort of break it or appear to be challenging their own belief system. But now I think events have gone past us, and I think we all understand now that we've got to change the way we approach development, regeneration.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no, it's amazing. Like as you mentioned, like I think Wembley Park is really amazing, and how it's now promoting itself as Northwest London's creative capital.
I know.
That's quite an achievement, so to say.
Yeah, well, when we, and the moves from that were, firstly, when we first started that project, right at the beginning, we said to Quintain, there's a group called West London Alliance, which has pulled together 5 London boroughs, and you need to be almost the capital. Wembley Park needs to be like the urban centre of those 5. It needs to reflect this idea, because I think when they pulled the boroughs together, it was because there was a sense that the money was going east to Stratford, and that the West was somehow wealthy and didn't need it. So we really sort of picked up on that. Then we talked about the creative district, back to that idea of a big shape that everyone inside it belonged to something. Then we created a set of placemaking principles. But the great thing about that job was that it was really taken seriously by management from the beginning, by the client, and all their design teams bought into it. And so things like the public realm, the Olympic Way, turned from being a piece of landscape boulevard to a giant stage where large events can happen. And so what's happened? Large events are going there. Huge events can take place there because it's now designed for that purpose, which has brought huge numbers of people in. Then we've got, these ideas of subsidized commercial space for artists, creatives, and so on. Then we got the Royal Philharmonic in. Then there was a sort of JV partnership with the Troubadour Theatre. So what you had there is the developer having to invest in culture because it was selling or promoting a kind of urban experience, and they weren't there, so they've had to provide it. So they've had to find commercial ways, economic ways to pull that material in and still make money, which I think is really interesting. So it can be done a bit. So there's evidence that there's on a certain scale, I think that's achievable. And now it's, again, a little bit like the eLab, Lab E20, it's got a life of its own. It's sort of generating now its own cultural energy, whereas before it had to be pump prime. So, I mean, I'm very proud of that. And it was great that when Brent won the London Borough of Culture, of course, they launched it on the new boulevard in Wembley Park. So all of those things we've talked about previously, all sorts of, for me, that's why Wembley is for me, it's probably our most successful project, because it feels like all these pieces that we use, all our Future City toolkit, all came together on that project. And we still go back occasionally, and they're very generous kind of from the client's point of view, saying, look, we still use the strategy, we're still using that system, and it's having a very, very powerful effect on the teams. So it's, I would say that's certainly the one that I would put forward as the probably the most successful, where we've made an impact on a, if you like, a very large brownfield big project without being the architects or the engineers or the agents.
Yeah, there's I think one last question, and that's maybe also a bit of a critical question. By doing so, creating social impact, but that might also lead towards maybe huge gentrification of those neighborhoods, and therefore increasing rents. And what's your thought about that?
I think the answer is how it's managed. It's what was that? Is there a Jane Jacobs quote, isn't there, about we expect too much of new buildings and too little of ourselves? I think that idea of it's only gentrification if you exclude communities, if you very deliberately pushing them away from that experience. So the pressure is always going to be on making sure that the facilities, the community facilities, the spaces, the studios, and these things are affordable. They have to be they've got to be affordable. And I would say on all the projects we're involved in, that is the driving force. It's inclusivity, genuine partnerships with real organizations, and making sure that accessibility and participation is fundamentally part of our strategy. I mean, I come from, I was an artist until 2000. I taught in art schools, was head of research at an art school. So I'm completely driven by art and education, and inclusivity. And I'm very anti-class. I want there to be a genuine accessibility. I mean, it's not always easy, but we do. With FUTURECITY certainly fights for it. And I would say if you look across the projects we've been involved in, whether it's Labby 20 or it's the new London studios that we're going to be doing on South Bank, or a huge studio complex we're involved in the East End, we're always pushing for artists and creatives to be given genuine access, paid properly, and affordable space, I think.
I call that social impact, Mark.
Thank you.
So
we try.
Thank you for being so open and so clear about what you do. And once again, congratulations with the Social Impact Award.
Thank you very much, Max. So really great to talk to you, and hope to meet you soon.